share my screen. Another official welcome to everyone. I'm Casey Hitt. I am one of the co-founders of Wisdom Tree Collective and a longtime spiritual director and practitioner of centering prayer. And I see some of your faces. You two are longtime practitioners of centering prayer or curious about centering prayer, maybe having come to it after practicing other kinds of meditation. And so we want to get some of your wisdom today too. That might help us deepen our practice. But I'm going to share my screen here. So to demonstrate how you, or I'm hoping that I'll demonstrate how you can hear the singing bowl, let's just take a moment for some slow, relaxed breaths. Maybe close your eyes or soften your gaze. Just for a time of moment of transition, if you can, and if you are busy with a toddler, just maybe soften your gaze a little bit, soften your face, even allow for those slow, relaxed breaths. All right, I hope that you could hear that. Let me go back here. Yeah. Okay. So today, as you know, there are many kinds of prayer and meditation. So what we're looking at today is contemplative prayer and meditation, the inner experience of the sacred, or we could describe it as cultivating relationship with God and receiving God's healing, guiding love through silence and solitude. Even within contemplative prayer and meditation, there are many expressions. So we'll take a deeper look at centering prayer itself, specifically. And then we'll get some brief tastes of other practices, just like these slow, relaxed breaths. These can, other practices and wisdom can complement and even deepen our centering prayer practices. So I'm going to ask everyone to, if you have questions along the way, just to write those down and keep those to the end because they might be answered as we go. Okay. So to help us further understand what I mean when I say contemplative prayer, let's just take a look at a poem. It's a rendering of St. Catherine of Siena by Daniel Ledensky. It's called Rest in Prayer. The sun hears the fields talking about effort, and the sun smiles and whispers to me, "Why don't the fields just rest? For I am willing to do everything to help them grow." Rest, my dears, in prayer. Now, this is the gift of centering prayer in a nutshell. Centering prayer invites us to ready ourselves for contemplation or the experience of the reality of being at union with God, at rest in the divine presence. St. Gregory the Great in the 6th century also spoke of contemplative prayer as resting in God. Now, you and I know that we don't always experience this reality. Most of the time, we don't experience this reality. But centering prayer teaches us to trust in its fundamental truth, that we are in Christ and Christ is in us. Hildegard of Bingen said something like, "God hugs you. You are encircled by the arms of the mystery of God." So even on those days, speaking of toddlers, even on those days when we feel like squirming toddlers in God's arms, centering prayer teaches us to trust even when we can't see or feel. And this really reminds me of living in Seattle with Mount Rainier. It was always there, but we'd go months without seeing that mountain because it'd be covered by clouds. It was still there. Sometimes we forgot that it was there until a sunbreak happened. So contemplation is that sunbreak of experience, or when the experience of union isn't there, the experience of trust in the presence. So we could say, looking at the painting as well and the poem, we could say that centering prayer encourages us to practice follow mind, like a field lays fallow. Letting go of our efforting, our planning, our ruminating, our wondering, and our wandering for 20 minutes and resting a while. So we'll come back to this poem and to the painting, but first a little background on centering prayer. In the 1970s, 3 Trappist monks, Fathers Thomas Keating, Basil Pennington, and William Menninger, discerned a simple, teachable method of prayer based on the ancient Christian contemplative prayer practices of the Desert Fathers and Mothers and the prayer tradition of the first 16 centuries of the Church that was largely lost, or it was only practiced in monasteries after the Reformation. Well, they called this method centering prayer. It was a way for Christians to rediscover the gift of contemplative prayer within their own tradition, rather than those who were thirsting for contemplative practices like silence and solitude, feeling like they had to turn to Eastern traditions to find it, not knowing that it existed in Christianity. And so as these monks began to teach it to ordinary folks outside of the monastery, it spread. Right? There was a hunger and thirst for the contemplative. And so in the 1980s, contemplative outreach was formed to help support the growing network of centering prayer practitioners. Well, these 3 Trappist monks taught that centering prayer was rooted in the wisdom teaching on prayer by Jesus. And when it comes to wisdom teachings, I want to say that any authentic wisdom is universal. So you don't have to be a Christian to benefit from Jesus's teachings or from centering prayer. Just like Christians don't have to be Buddhists to benefit from practices like, loving kindness, for instance. Okay, so the book of Matthew, Jesus says, "But you, when you pray, go into your inner room, close your door, and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." So notice in his words here, we see solitude as part of Jesus's prayer teaching. And this practice is part of his own rhythm, as he often went to solitary, quiet places to pray, like a mountain or a garden. So now he's saying, when at home, go into a secret place even there. So there's both an outer and an inner dimension to solitude that I want to point out. Outer solitude has to do with the external reality, like going into a literal inner room or closet within a house, or fleeing to the desert, literally getting away. Yet it's not just about leaving other people behind, but phones and books as well, right? Whatever keeps us connected to the outside world, even a book or a website or social media, those all represent another person's voice and presence. So like a taste of a silent retreat, and you see I have Monastery Immaculate Conception there. That's one of my favorite places for retreats, to go to a quiet place. But like a little silent retreat, centering prayer echoes Jesus's invitation to leave the crowd behind and go to a quiet place. And you know what? I've discovered over the past 20 years in spiritual direction that for many people, this is scary, especially if we hold a toxic image of God, unlike Jesus's intimate image of his Father in heaven. So this may be one of the reasons that some have resistance when it comes to sitting in silence, when it comes to centering prayer, and rightfully so. I wouldn't want to sit in silence or go to a quiet place to be alone with God if my image of God is not love, if the image of God is toxic. And so working with a spiritual director can help with this. And sometimes as we begin practicing centering prayer meditation, this comes up. And so again, spiritual direction can be of help. So as we leave the external voices behind, many of you know, we may discover that the internal ones are just as loud. Our to-do list is shouting out at us. And so I want to say it takes practice to enter into inner solitude. People tend to give up on the practice of centering prayer and meditation too quickly, but it takes practice to enter into this internal reality. Well, building on Jesus referring to the temple of his own body in John 2:19, St. Paul asks, hey, do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? For God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. St. Teresa of Avila, she echoed this in the 16th century when she said, remember, the Lord is within us, and we should be there with him. So we can see spiritually mature people across time and traditions trying to describe and encourage us, trying to describe and encourage us to go to this inner place of the indwelling Spirit. And that's often helped, right, by going to the outer place, by going to the inner room of a house, going to a monastery, going to somewhere out in nature alone. But here's some of the words used to describe this inner place. Spiritual director Beverly Lanzetta called it the inner monastery. Father Bede Griffiths, he was drawing on the Hindu tradition, referred to it as the cave of the heart. Henry Nouwen, writing about the inner cell, perhaps he had read Catherine of Siena talking about the spiritual cell where one experiences God's goodness within themselves. And if you're not familiar with the word cell, remember it refers to that tiny personal room in the monastery. Howard Thurman, we could call him the spiritual director of Martin Luther King Jr., called this inner reality one's inward sea or inner island of peace. And I want to take a look at a quote from him. There is in every person an inward sea. And in that sea, there is an island. And on that island, there is an altar. And standing guard before that altar is the angel with the flaming sword. Nothing can get by that angel to be placed upon that altar unless it has the mark of your inner authority. Nothing passes the angel with the flaming sword to be placed upon your altar unless it be a part of the fluid area of your consent. This is your crucial link with the eternal. So he's offering us some powerful images here, and images that can help us understand why we might want to commit to this practice of solitude, of inner solitude, of upholding a boundary to honor this inner place of strength and goodness and love that no outer noise can destroy, can disturb. And I also want to draw our attention to the word consent, because that's an important word in the practice of centering prayer. In fact, you may have heard centering prayer called the prayer of consent. It's a prayer of permission, your own yes to holy mystery. Now, Father William Menninger, who I just mentioned, one of those Trappist monks, he summed up centering prayer by saying, God is going to love you, and that is it. God is going to love you, and that is it. So we could describe our consent as offering our yes to letting God love us. Letting God love us or consciously letting God love us for 5 minutes, 20 minutes. God is going to love you, and that is it. Now, returning to the history of centering prayer, those who sought to go deeper into Jesus' teaching on prayer included the 3rd century desert mothers and fathers that I mentioned. And those are people like Saint Anthony or Theodore of Alexandria. And then contemplatives such as Gregory of Nyssa and Catherine of Siena and Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Julian of Norwich, Thomas Merton. Way too many for me to get into here. We could have a class on each one of those. However, a key moment in the development of centering prayer itself happened in 1974 when Father William Menninger, again, a retreat master at St. Joseph's Abbey in Massachusetts, found this dusty little book. It was in the Abbey Library, and it was called The Cloud of Unknowing. And in reading it, he became excited about how this medieval text offered a deep but simple way to enter and receive the experience of being loved by God, of union with God, something that Jesus not only knew but lived in saying, I and the Father are one. So I'm showing you there Carmen Acevedo Butcher's translation. And actually, this past week, I ran across an online workshop of hers on YouTube. Haven't even watched it yet, but I'm going to send it to you after this. But it's on the cloud and centering prayer. So it's a short little title. People refer to it as the cloud. But in the cloud, the anonymous author suggests having a single word, if at all necessary, to help one surrender all of oneself, including thoughts and actions, and including even one's ideas of God, to God. So helping one, this little word, if necessary, helps one surrender all of oneself, including thoughts and actions, and even one's ideas of God, to God. I often wonder if the anonymous author was familiar with Meister Eckhart, because I don't know, for those of you who are familiar with Meister Eckhart, he spoke of praying to God to rid me of God, right? Speaking of letting go of all one's false images of God. And really, there's no image, not even the best ones, that can describe all of who God is. But anyway, Meister Eckhart was being silenced. So I wonder if the anonymous author chose to be anonymous in writing similar things as Meister Eckhart. But when it comes to surrender, centering prayer can complement other kinds of prayer, especially the prayers that involve words and thought. So it encourages us to gently release clutching to those words and thoughts, to open our hands and surrender. So in other words, we've said all we know to say. We've thought really hard about this. And now we open our hands and say, thy will be done, with Jesus. Or as his mother said first, let it be done unto me according to your word. I'm not exactly sure what your word or will is, but I'm going to trust you. So for 20 minutes here, for 5 minutes here, I'm going to let go of all my thinking around it. I'm going to let go of all my words and practice surrender. I'm going to surrender to the inner goodness, which is God in me, the sacred mystery. So the simple method of this prayer of consent or surrender has 4 parts. The first part is choose a sacred word as the symbol of your intention to consent to God's presence and action within. So your sacred word is that which holds meaning for you. It's a reminder of your return to trust. So it may be the word trust itself. It could be love or Jesus, could be listen. My sacred word for a long time has been home. I think about how the sacred word is what calls that prodigal wandering mind back home to the arms of sacred presence. And then sitting comfortably and with eyes closed, settle briefly and silently introduce the sacred word as the symbol of your consent to God's presence and action within. So sitting comfortably, whether in a chair or a kneeling stool or on the floor, oftentimes keeping a straight back helps us to remain relaxed, but without, not falling asleep. You might purposely soften your face so that if you are straightening your back, you're not trying to hold a rigid position. 3, when engaged with thoughts, which includes body sensations, feelings, images, and reflections, return ever so gently to the sacred word. So it's not that we're thinking, because that's what the brain does. It thinks. It thinks like the heart beats, the lungs breathe. Thoughts come and thoughts go. But if you discover that the thoughts come and now you followed after them, right? Now you're having conversations, you're writing emails, you're planning lunch, you're thinking theologically, you're whatever it is. If you've noticed that the thought has come and it hasn't gone, that you've gone with it, then that's a wonderful, beautiful moment to stop and call that thought, let go of that thought, and come back home. Letting go, no matter how productive or wonderful that thought is. This isn't listening prayer. This is resting prayer. So we're letting that thought go, and we're returning back home to practice resting in God. So we may be saying that sacred word like 100 times, right? And that's okay. Sometimes we're saying it a few times. Sometimes it seems like it's more like a mantra being said over and over again, because on any given day, our minds might be all over the place. And then fourth, at the end of the prayer period, remain in silence with eyes closed for a couple of minutes. This reminds me of I went to a centering prayer retreat years ago where they combined that with the forgiveness prayer. And Father Carl Rico was teaching that, and he humorously said to think in your centering prayer practice at the end, to think of it as a microwave meal, which includes instructions to let it sit for a few minutes after the timer goes off. And he says, you don't want your practice to be half-baked. So just a humorous little way of allowing for transition. That transition is important. Personally, I like to have 3 slow, relaxed breaths before moving on, and moving on to Lectio Divina, which is that's part of our Friday morning practice. But also personally, I like to engage Lectio Divina. Now, knowing the rhythm of centering prayer is important, but also knowing yourself is too. And we all have different personalities. And I know, again, some of you are longtime practitioners of centering prayer and some of Eastern meditation, whether Buddhist or Hindu, and so you have some wisdom. So during centering prayer meditation, what helps you best center to come back home to the present? Are there some simple shifts in body or mind that help you prepare to rest in prayer? So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and allow ourselves to share with each other, whether in chat or unmute. Okay, so whenever you have engaged meditation or centering prayer, is there a little tip, or is there something that you've discovered that helps you? Maybe you're not a person that a sacred word is that helpful. Maybe you need to come back to your breath. Or maybe you're a person that needs to listen to the sounds around you. So I just want to have a little time here where we can unmute or type in the chat what your experience is that could help any of us. Yes, Darcia.
I typically will light a candle. And so when I find my thoughts wandering, I'll gently open my eyes. Look at that as a reminder that the Holy Spirit is with me, and I want to enjoy this time alone.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, I find it helpful to do like a body scan, just to sort of get in my body and comfortable with just make sure that I'm seated sort of not, this way, just sort of straight and comfortable on my sitting bones, I guess is the best way to say it. So that's kind of the way I would start. And just be comfortable there first, and it doesn't take long, So.
Thank you. Right, so a body scan to help you get comfortable in your sitting bones it sounds like that almost gives the clue to the brain that it's time to shift into meditation and shift into the quiet. Yeah, anyone else? Let's see. Izzy written something. Let me read that in the chat, that I need a word or phrase that connects to an image. I can usually hold the image longer and go back to it later, but I'll forget a word. So for some, we're image people, we need to have an image. My image of home actually my word home actually comes with an image for me. I envision that here I am somewhere, I'm at someone else's house and I need to come back home. Elizabeth, wonderful. I like to wear a weighted blanket or weighted heating pad to ground me during the time of meditation and centering prayer. So something very physical like that to help with the grounding and centering. Anyone else? Sometimes I find, to go with what Maria had said of finding your sitting bones, sometimes I find that that I need to literally have my tailbone tucked just a little bit, that it's too curved. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but to tuck it so it straightens my spine a little bit, because I tend to hold a lot of tension in my body. So softening my face and straightening, lengthening my tailbone and my spine help. Yeah, I tend to carry stress in my shoulders, so it's helpful to intentionally relax my shoulders before. Yes. So you know the areas of your body that may need some TLC. And so paying specific attention and tenderness to those, offering tenderness and invitation to those areas of the body. Thank you, Meridell. Anyone else in the chat or want to unmute?
Breath work is a key for me going into that time. And when my mind's racing, actually box breathing. So I've got the image of a box and breathing up each side and across and down. So that, having the breath work and an image associated with that helps to calm the racing mind.
Lovely. Thank you. So box breathing. Is there anywhere that people can look that up, or can we just type that into Google? Yes, you can find that on Google. Okay. Box breathing, or YouTube, if you're not familiar with box breathing. So having a particular kind of breath work exercise, a particular, not just a few breaths, but a particular way of breath work can be a way of entering. All right, for you internal processors, if you come up with something later on, there'll be time that you can put in there. You can email it, and I can email it to other people. But it's interesting, from a candle to the breath to the softening of the face, the simplest things. Having a prayer shawl or a weighted blanket can make a difference in our practice. All right, let me share our screen again. Oh, one thing that one of our members in Centering Prayer on Friday mornings mentioned to me is that for 20 minutes, she puts in earbuds to hear binaural beats. Do you know what I'm talking about? When I say that, is she's got to have that kind of going back and forth. So she sets her timer and puts those earbuds in, and that's something that helps her. And she seemed to be, thanks, Deborah, for putting that up there for us. But she said, she brought that up with me and said, I feel like I'm cheating. I was like, oh, no. That's the spirit of the practice, is to help us to center, help us to prepare to rest in God. So if it looks like putting in those earbuds, then that's fine. Okay. So here's our Friday morning rhythm. And you're always welcome to join me. And the link that you use to do this today is the same link. So you have it already. And that we use it every Friday. Our overall rhythm is at 8:50, we gather. Anyone who wants to gather, that's optional. Because after you practice for a while, you start to know each other, even though a lot of the time is in silence. And so there are folks that wanted to have some time to visit. You don't have to do that, but there are quite a few people who like to have a little time together beforehand. And then we transition with a psalm or quote or some kind of heart and body meditation. And that's the time where you can turn off your video, because some people like to practice centering prayer meditation without their video on. And then we have 20 minutes of sitting in silent centering prayer. Now, contemplative outreach suggests for personal practice 2 20-minute sessions a day. But you can do one sit or two, it doesn't matter, for as little or as long as you like. And their app allows for anything, I think, from 1 minute to 99 minutes. And so you can do as much or as little as you would like. But in our communal practice, it's 20 minutes. And then we engage Lectio Divina, followed by communal sharing, and then an ending prayer with a blessing or a breath. So that's our overall rhythm on any given Friday morning. I want to give just a brief overview of Lectio Divina for those of you who may not be familiar with it. It's just as there are 4 parts to centering prayer, the Benedictine tradition formalized the ancient practice of holy reading. A lot of times we see it in 4 parts. And again, that was to make it simple and accessible, just like centering prayer. So we have a rhythm of rest, reading, reflecting, and responding. The resting part is centering prayer itself. The reading is the scripture or text will be read 3 times. The reflection is paying attention to what word or phrase is seeking your attention. And the responding is to speak to God or journal about how that word or phrase is intersecting with your life or the world. So looking again at this reading and reflecting is that the text is slowly read through 2 times. We're not trying to speed read. We're allowing some slow reading. And if you've joined us before, some of us got together that had practiced in person and online centering prayer. We're going to try to go back to the 3 times being read instead of just 2. But after that second time that it's read, members can type in the chat the word or phrase that's seeking their attention, that's wanting their attention. Sometimes it's a word or phrase that you just wish it wasn't. You're like, I so wish my attention was drawn to this word or this phrase. But this other one that maybe you have resistance toward just keeps popping out to you. So the text is read a 3rd time, and then we prayerfully sit with the word or phrase. I have that little plus or cross there because I want to say just a little more about that, is what it means to prayerfully sit with the word or phrase, is that you're going to be still with it. You're going to slowly chew and savor it. It's not time to jump into research mode online or read commentary. It's time to trust that you need no other information to read. It's time to allow the word or phrase to read you. So allow the Spirit to stir thoughts, memories, associations, questions, and holy invitations through that word, letting that word or phrase lead you to your deeper heart's cry or desire. Lead you to that prayer that's waiting for you in your inner room. So Lectio Divina isn't firstly about getting something out of the text, but being in relationship with God who gently draws something out of you and me through the text. Okay, so it's not about getting something out of the text, but being in relationship with God who's gently drawing something out of you and me through the text. So Lectio Divina invites us to look and listen for the sacred. So this practice of holy reading teaches us to be on the lookout for the sacred in all and how it stirs the sacred in all parts of us. Okay, so this year in our Friday morning centering prayer group, we're going to look and listen for the sacred in not only the Bible, but in texts like the Cloud of Unknowing, the Tao Te Ching, poetry, music, art. Okay, the text can be anything. So I want to allow for us to engage centering prayer and Lectio Divina here, to engage the process, give us a taste of Friday morning. And let's see, how about we do 3 minutes of centering prayer, and then Lectio and Visio Divina with the poem by St. Catherine and the painting by Van Gogh. And with the painting, just allow your gaze to rest on the painting and notice where your eye goes and what it stirs in you. Okay, and you might, the painting and the poem might dance, or you may be drawn to just stay with one, stay with just the poem or the painting. And then after our process, which will include a little time where we can have some communal sharing, we'll end the class today with just discussing the flowering and fruit of centering prayer. What does it offer to us? Okay. So allow yourself a moment to settle, to center, to breathe. To receive this psalm as a way of transition into the silence. But I have stilled and quieted my soul. Like a weaned child with its mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me. But I have stilled and quieted my soul. Like a weaned child with its mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me. Rest in prayer. The sun hears the fields talking about effort, and the sun smiles and whispers to me, why don't the fields just rest? For I am willing to do everything to help them grow. Rest, my dears, in prayer. The sun hears the fields talking about effort, and the sun smiles and whispers to me, why don't the fields just rest? For I am willing to do everything to help them grow. Rest, my dears, in prayer. If you'd like, you can type into the chat a word or phrase, or you can just stay with eyes closed. That's up to you. A third reading. The sun hears the fields talking about effort, and the sun smiles and whispers to me, why don't the fields just rest? For I am willing to do everything to help them grow. Rest, my dears, in prayer. So allow for a couple of minutes to be with your word or phrase, or to gaze at the painting. Noticing what God is stirring in you. Amen. Let's take a few moments when you're ready, maybe to put, if you want, put a few words to what is stirring. Is there, you might share the word or phrase or the part of the painting that you're drawn to, whether in the chat or unmute, you're welcome to do either.
The hills in the far back corner of the Van Gogh were drawing me, because that's a place of solitude for me and quiet.
I loved the picture of Van Gogh, and I was drawn to the sun, and it seemed like the sun was shining and you could see the reflection of the light in the fields. But then there was a shadow before the sun, and I went to the shadow, and the word rest came to me. And it's like the shadow's there, but if we rest, the sun, we'll still feel the sun and still feel the warmth of the light. It was a beautiful image. I love that painting.
For me, there was something in the word rest and also in the wall in the painting. Like I'd never noticed that stone wall before. And so there's something about that I feel that God's stirring about boundaries that has to do with rest.
I enjoyed the looking at the picture with the phrase that stood out, I'm willing to do everything. So I looked at the entire picture, and so I saw mountains and valleys. That brick wall I looked at as a bridge, because like he's the bridge over troubled waters. And then I saw all the seasons, the red for fall, the white looked like snow to me, and then the bright green, and all that changes that happens in life, transitioning from season to season. But through it all, there was so much peace and tranquility that represented, I am willing to do everything.
Anyone else? All right, let me share my screen once more with you. And so the flowering and fruit of centering prayer. As you know, most of you already know, it's experienced outside of the time of centering prayer, right? Because a lot of times during the time of meditation, we are squirmy when we're constantly saying that word or coming back to our breath. So there are many that any given day, it can feel like a failure on the outside of things. There may be more clouds than sun breaks, more wriggly mind than resting mind. But as we continue to persevere and trust that healing and growth are happening under the surface of our awareness, that is, well, I want you to look at the words of the author of The Cloud. And let me tell you what this discipline will do for you. It will change your heart. The author goes on to say, the soul perfectly committed to the work of contemplation becomes one with God in spirit and loves sacrificially as Christ did. You wish wholeness on everyone you know. I find that really exciting, is when we experience or become aware of our union with God. We may call it union with love. We see as God sees. Whether ourselves, whether other people, creation, all is seen through the eyes of love. And this brings healing and transformation on many levels. But on a practical, personal level, I want to show you this. For heart people learn to let go of compulsive connecting and comparing and discover in solitude, the solitude of centering prayer, the experience of being loved by the beloved. If you're a head person, you learn to let go of compulsive thinking and obsessing. And you discover in the silence the peace and voice of the beloved. If you're a body person, a gut person, we learn to let go of compulsive doing and discover in stillness that we can simply stop and be with the beloved and allow action to arise from our inner stillness rather than driven energy. Okay, so whether you are a heart, a head, or a body person, I want to invite you to be patient with your personal practice. Okay, and if your schedule allows, I would love for you to join me in a communal practice of centering prayer on Friday mornings. And so let me stop this because I know that many of you may have something that you want to share as being a fruit or what you have seen flower in your life because of meditation, because of centering prayer. So we have a couple minutes left. Would anyone like to drop in the chat or unmute and say, I've been practicing this and here has been so far some of the fruit or the flowering of my life that has come through centering prayer and meditation.
It helps me know that I'm a work in progress. I think some days are good, some days aren't, it's just uneven. So you just kind of have to accept and roll with it, I think.
For me, I like to think as when we go into surgery, that we are put under anesthesia and we don't really know or feel or are consciously aware of absolutely anything that is happening there, But when we are out of that, we know that something happened, right? And we hope that things will be better. So I think that it helps me because I'm just a head person that, and I need to understand everything and process everything and control everything that is sickening to myself. So it really helps me to let go, with that attitude. Okay, Lord, here I am. It's your work in me. It's not me doing the work of, the spiritual work in myself. It's your work in me, as you promise in the word, right? That he's the one who does in us. So that's the image that helps me through centering prayer. So, I don't necessarily know everything that changes or goes on, but I trust that over time, I'm becoming more like Christ.
Thank you, Graciela. And sometimes other people recognize the change in us before we even do. Like maybe we didn't snap at someone in a situation that we would normally be snappy or irritated quickly. So it can come in very practical ways like that. And sometimes we don't even know until we look back and say, wow, look at, I didn't know how did this happen? How did this patience increase? Or how did this forgiveness happen? I don't hold as much resentment towards this person. That this deep inner work by the divine physician has been happening during our surrender for 20 minutes. So anyone else before I end our time together today? Well, then I want to just thank you. Thank you so much for joining me, and just say to all of us, may we rest in prayer. Amen.